Today's adventure is taking us to Steamtown National Historic Site in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Steamtown National Historic Site is an industrial heritage site dedicated to the role that steam railroad transportation and the people who made it happen played within America's Industrial Revolution. The National Park Service runs this large roundhouse and museum as a testament to railroading in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with lots of equipment and exhibits on display to see and experience. But, like most government entities, Steamtown has its own history and controversies, and we'll touch on that as we explore this fascinating location. Hi, I'm Eric. For my 50th birthday, my wife is sending me on a 2-week adventure to see as many steam locomotives as I can. But I'm not taking this trip alone. I'll be joined by my son Carson and our good friend Chris. Now, Chris and I have both worked in the tourist railroad industry for many years. So along the way, we're going to catch up with some old friends and meet some new ones. We're going to get some special behind-the-scenes access into things that most people don't normally see, and also offer insight into the complicated machinery of steam locomotives and the world of tourist railroading. So join us on this epic adventure where each day brings a new discovery. All right, day 3. This is day 3?
Yeah.
We are at Steamtown National Historic Site. Have always wanted to be here. This has been on my, again, another place on my bucket list for a long time. And it is definitely, as you arrive, something to see. So let's take a look. So sitting outside here in the parking lot, this is a Reading T1, the 2124. Big 484 for the Reading. These were, I believe, built by their own shops. There's 4 of these that are still in existence: the 2100, the 2101, the 2102, and the 2124. The 2101 was the first mainline excursion steam engine I ever saw a road behind in 1978. So this is a sister engine to that. But as you drive up, there is a Union Pacific big boy. We'll check that out in a minute. Before we go any further, we should talk about how Steamtown came to be and what it has become over the years. The origins of Steamtown are traced back to a railfan millionaire from the seafood industry, F. Nelson Blount, who coincidentally has the same birthday as myself. As the railroads were retiring their steam locomotives in favor of diesels and sending them to the scrappers in the early 1960s, he took it upon himself to save as many as he could. Because of his location in New England, his close prominence to Canada, and the fact that the Canadian railroads ran their steam locomotives a little later than in the U.S., a large amount of the collection came from Canadian and New England railroads. In 1964, he established a museum in Bellows Falls, Vermont, to display the collection and called it Steamtown, USA. Unfortunately, Blount died in a plane crash in 1967, but not before creating the Steamtown Foundation to manage the collection and museum. However, the museum was failing economically. The foundation board blamed a big part of this on its remote location. In the early 1980s, they began looking for a new home. Scranton, Pennsylvania fit the bill, since it was a community suffering from its own economic woes due to the decline of the coal industry, and it was thought that a prominent museum located near several large population centers would boost both attendance in the museum and tourism in the city. So in 1984, the collection moved from Vermont to Pennsylvania to be housed in the old Delaware, Lackawanna and Western shop complex. However, after only a few years of operation in Scranton, Steamtown was in even more dire financial shape. Negotiations were made with the National Park Service to take over the collection and museum, and in 1986, Steamtown National Historic Site was created. The Park Service spent millions on developing the site and held a grand reopening in 1995, with 4 visiting steam locomotives joining the festivities to bring the total number of operating steam locomotives to 7. Multiple excursions were run on the old D&LW trackage through the Pocono Mountains. 211,000 people visited Steamtown that year. Many people, including myself, look at that as the high point for the museum. Attendance has not come close to that number ever since, and has been below 100,000 every year since 2005. Steamtown ran its last mainline excursion in 2012. That left them completely without an operable steam locomotive until 2016, when Baldwin Locomotive Works 060 switcher number 26 was returned to operation. Since then, short excursions around the yard are offered on weekends during the summer. Much of Steamtown is very well done, with very professional displays and interesting artifacts to look at, but it's what is missing from the National Park Service's premier heritage railroad site that is disappointing. We'll talk more about that later. But first, let's take a tour through the museum. We were here on a Tuesday, so there were no operating excursions. I think there were only a few dozen guests, which was nice for us without crowds, but not that good for visitation. A large showcase event had been held about a week earlier, so many of the steam locomotives that normally are displayed inside the roundhouse were moved outside for better access. The visitor center and the theater were closed for some major HVAC upgrades. I guess the park felt that without these elements, much of the visitor experience was lacking, so they didn't charge us any admission. Or maybe without the visitor center open, they didn't have a way to process the tickets. So let's start in the Technology Museum. The Technology Museum appropriately has a lot of history about the Lackawanna Railroad and their focus on creating a modern and efficient railroad. But there's also a lot of things that are more common to all railroads, things like operation of railroad signals, railroad disasters, and common jargon used by railroaders. Carson had a great time quizzing me on the use of whistle signals, of which I only got about 50% right. But to my credit, the use of radios has eliminated the use of most whistle signals these days, and each railroad had their own versions, like a different dialect of the same language. Check out this. Well, I know this is Steamtown and is supposed to be about steam locomotives, but this engine block is a pretty significant part of railroad history in its own right, and definitely a technology worthy of historical preservation. This is a 16-cylinder EMD 567C, which produced up to 1,750 horsepower and would have been used in locomotives like F9s, GP9s, and SD9s. EMD, of course, stands for Electromotive Diesel, which at the time was a division of General Motors. They were the most productive manufacturer of diesel-electric locomotives probably from the 1940s until the 1990s, and were a large reason that block designation means that each cylinder has 567 cubic inches of volume. Compare that to an 8-cylinder Chevy big block, such as the famous 409, which has 409 cubic inches of volume for the entire engine. Then multiply that 567 cubic inches times 16 The later cylinders. 645 engine is very similar, just a little larger. I actually went to a 2-week training course at the factory in LaGrange, Illinois, and saw those in production. Unlike most engine blocks that are cast, the EMD design is all fabricated. They start with 2 pieces of C-channel and weld them together at a 45-degree angle. Then add more and more pieces until you get an entire engine. The technology on these 2 strokes is unique and fascinating. But I'm not going to go into any more detail here. I have several other videos on my channel that take a look at these engines more closely. Now, this is what I think is perhaps the most significant exhibit in the entire museum. J. David Conrad was commissioned to create this sectional display of a steam locomotive, but while everything is labeled, I think the museum is lacking in its interpretation of the exhibit to explain just how everything works. In fact, there were 2 gentlemen there trying to figure out the steam cycle and drafting system while we were there, and they were very happy I was able to explain it to them more clearly. So let's take an important few minutes and demonstrate how it all works. We're going to start with the tender. It has 2 main sections. In the middle is where the coal is stored. The outside is the water storage. At the rear of the locomotive is the firebox, which, just like it sounds, is a large box that the fireman shovels the coal into so it can burn. At the front of the firebox is the rear tube sheet, which is a flat metal sheet full of holes. Each hole holds a steel tube that then extends through the boiler to the front tube sheet. The products of combustion from the fire, or more commonly known as smoke, pass through the tubes to the front of the locomotive into a cylindrical chamber, brilliantly called the smoke box. From there, the smoke goes out the smoke stack in the top. Now, that seems simple enough, but where does the steam come from? For this, let's return to the firebox. If we take a closer look, we see that there are a large number of bolts extending outwards from the firebox. These are called stay bolts, and they separate the firebox from the boiler shell. The space in between and on top of the firebox and surrounding the tubes is filled with water. There are basically 2 main types of stay bolts, rigid and flexible. Rigid ones are basically drilled or welded directly to both the firebox sheet on one side and the boiler shell on the other side. This makes them very strong, but subject to breakage with the expansion and contraction of the boiler. So in areas where there is likely to be the most difference in expansion between the much hotter firebox sheets and the cooler boiler shell, they use a flexible stable. These are attached rigidly to the firebox, but the end on the boiler shell has a ball and socket type joint. Remember at the East Broad Top when Dave talked about having to install flexible stay-bolts on the 16?
Like the one thing I changed on the boiler is the flexies on the outside rail. All these engines were prone to crack bolt to bolt.
This was an improvement over the original design. Since the firebox is full of very hot fire, it heats up the water that surrounds it. When the water boils, it turns to steam. The steam rises and is collected in the steam dome at the top. This is typically where the throttle valve is located. When the engineer pulls the throttle lever in the cab, it then pulls on a rod through the inside of the boiler, which opens the valve in the steam dome. From there, steam flows through a large pipe inside the boiler called the dry pipe to the smoke box. In the smoke box, the steam splits into two branches called branch pipes. These go down to the admission valves, which control which side of the piston the steam needs to go. The pistons are double acting, meaning they provide power both when they are moving forward and backwards. Once the steam is used to push the pistons, it then flows to the bottom of the smoke box and through a nozzle, which directs the steam up the stack. The pistons are connected to the wheels with rods, and that makes the wheels turn and the train move. Since the locomotive has two pistons, and each piston has 2 strokes per revolution, there are 4 piston strokes per revolution of the wheels. When the steam is exhausted up the stack from each piston stroke, it makes a chuff. So you get 4 chuffs for each revolution of the wheels. Now, what is that water for in the tender? Well, when the water in the boiler turns to steam and moves the pistons, then goes up the stack, it's gone. So to keep from running out of water, you have to replace it. 2 main devices are used to do this. One is an injector, which uses steam flowing through a nozzle to push the water into the boiler. The other method is a water pump, which uses steam to move a piston, which pushes the water into the boiler. We can talk more about this later. Of course, this is just the basics. There is so much more since each builder and each railroad had their own ideas what would make their locomotives perform better for the service they were designed. Things like superheaters, front-end throttles, compounds, articulated, safety valves, air compressors. The list of modifications goes on and on. To me, this is what museums like this are meant to do. Teach and demonstrate historic evolution and technical concepts to bring about a better understanding of the mechanical world. The Technology Museum also has a couple freight equipment displays, like this wooden Rutland caboose and a Lackawanna boxcar. From here, we're going to go into the Roundhouse, which is supposed to be a display on how steam locomotives are maintained for daily service. Today, the Roundhouse feels sort of empty because most of the locomotives that are typically stored in here have been moved outside temporarily for better viewing. However, off in the corner is where they are conducting a boiler wash on Baldwin 060 switcher number 26, the one operable steam locomotive that the museum has. It only runs on select weekends during the summer, and again, today is a Tuesday, so no operable steam today. The other steam locomotive in the Roundhouse is Lackawanna number 565, a 260 mogul type that is one of only 2 surviving steam locomotives from the mighty Delaware, Lackawanna and Western Railroad. Because of its heritage, there's a lot of interest among the local rail fans to see this engine run once again, and a restoration effort has started, but unfortunately seems to have stalled with the locomotive left in this partially disassembled state. So while we were in the Roundhouse, we bumped into this really nice park ranger, and he asked how our visit was going. And we said it was going pretty well, but we asked about the Boston and Maine engine, and he said, well, how much time do you guys have? And we says, well, we've got all day. And he says, well, I don't, but I've got some time right now, and if you guys want to see it, I'll take you back and show it to you. So he took us in the back shops behind the Roundhouse, which is an area that visitors don't normally go through. I believe when they have their special events, they allow visitors through there through separate tours and things because they had some displays set up, like a ring of fire and turning wheel centers and things like that. The machine shop is actually pretty well stocked. And he says that most of this equipment came from Navy surplus. and it's very nice equipment. So I guess the Navy was getting rid of their old machine equipment, and so they're another government entity, so they were able to snatch it up pretty darn cheap. And that's what they use in order to maintain the heavy work on their equipment. In addition to the large overhead crane, the shop also has the biggest drop table I've ever seen. I'm used to drop tables that can drop one axle at a time, but this one is big enough that you can drop an entire truck out of a car body or a locomotive. It's humongous.
Yeah, this is nice. This was left over from the railroad days, and it was in operational shape when we got it, so we lucked out on that. You know the story behind the Boston and Meadow?
Not a lot. I'm not, I'm from the West, so I don't follow the stuff in the East as much. I know it, yeah. I know it's been a project for a long time.
Mm-hmm. We are hopefully, if it goes through this next budget year, 2024, there's a large amount of money coming into this. Okay.
From the Park Service, from the government?
Park Service, from the government. It's been in the project system for years, and it takes a while to work its way up. Finally, this is a priority for the Northeast region.
Good, good. Is the president kind of pushing that a little bit since he's from this area?
I'd imagine he would be, but I don't know that. I don't know that for sure. But it's worked its way up to the top of the project list.
In case you didn't catch that, he says that they've got funding expected coming in 2024 through the federal government to be able to help get this project moving along, and they'll be looking for outside contractors. So that's pretty exciting. This project has been kind of stagnant for quite a few years. The Park Service has looked at this locomotive as the next mainline excursion engine for Steamtown. After the two Canadian engines, the Pacific and the Mikado, that were running excursions for many years, after they got retired due to boiler certifications, it was expected that this locomotive was going to take their place. And it's been quite a while on this project, and as you can see, they still have a long way to go. But they have made progress, and we'll take a quick look at some of the things that they have done.
So with the NRHS group and their help, we got a new engine cab right here. All new combustion.
All brand new yeah. All new construction. Oh yeah, look at that. Awesome.
The work was done on the pilot truck here.
Uh-huh.
We had work down at Strasburg on the big drivers to take it around there to see them.
Right. I think I saw them when they were in Strasburg 2 years ago.
This is as far as I can take you over here. So
okay, understood. Yep.
It's not me, but I've got eyes on me.
No, understood. Yep, no.
You guys work for railroads.
No, we very much appreciate what we're able to do. And we don't want to cause any waves. Do it again.
Again?
Yeah.
What?
One more time. So this is an Illinois Central 280 that they have sitting outside that they let you go in the cab, ring the bell, and check it out. It was pretty cool, and Carson really enjoyed it. So this is what Carson really wanted to see, and admittedly, I did too. Big Boy 4012. It's very prominent when you first drive into the parking lot, even parked on curved tracks so that you can see the articulation. In fact, it's the only articulated locomotive in the collection, and that's only one of the things that makes it a unique exhibit for Steamtown. I'm personally befuddled how they were even able to get this locomotive here, considering most of the railroad lines in the east have tighter clearance restrictions than those in the west, and it originally was part of the collection way up in Vermont. Apparently, it's pretty much stuck in its current location at the museum on a dead-end track, since it can't fit on the turntable to get out. Maybe if they separate the tender, I don't know. Anyway, this is the fourth Big Boy I've seen out of the 8 that are left in existence. It's actually quite remarkable that for such a unique class of locomotives that only had 25 built, 8 of them were preserved. That's 32%. Other than the Rio Grande K36 and K37 narrow gauge engines and the LS&I consolidations, I can't think of a better preservation ratio for any U.S. railroad. So I've seen 4004 in Cheyenne, Wyoming, 4006 in St. Louis, and the 4014, both in Pomona, California on display and in operation in Tucson, Arizona. Steamtown spent over $1 million to do the cosmetic restoration on 4012 2 years ago, which seems like an astronomical sum for a locomotive on static display. But it is a very large locomotive, and they did an amazing job. When we first arrived, we noticed that it looked like they offered cab tours, but there was a chain across the stairs. After asking our friendly ranger about it, he said they only had it closed because they were expecting weather, but since the rain hadn't started yet, he could open it up for us. And going inside the big boy cab is a real treat. One might think that after seeing an operable 4014, why would someone get excited about the static 4012? But there's a few reasons. Union Pacific did a great job with the 4014, and I'm glad it's getting such popularity. But most of us will never get this close to the 4014, much less have the opportunity to go in the cab. Whenever the 4014 goes out, there's a million people standing all around, and it's hot, and there's people working, and you have to keep your distance. And also consider that the 4014 has been modified to burn oil, as well as other modern requirements. Not that I have any issues with this. It was a great decision by UP to convert it to an oil burner, which made its ability to operate in a variety of territories much more likely. But the 4012 is original and unmodified, so it has quite the importance in preservation on its own. We spent a lot of time scrutinizing this amazing piece of machinery, but I'm not going to go into all of that in this video. Instead, I've made another video that is more of the technical discussions on how everything works. The link is in the description if you want to check that one out. Injector control?
Yep. Okay.
See, here's your main stoker feed to control the steam to the jets. And then these ones that control probably the individual fans to fan it out. Chris, you know more about that than I do. I've never really worked on coal. All right, so let's go back inside the building and take a quick look inside the History Museum. Again, this is very well done. Talked a lot about the history of the Lackawanna Railroad and railroads of the area, talking about different railroad lines that ran in the area and the history that they had. And this display right here talks about different positions of people that work on the railroad. So engineer, firemen, conductors, porters, ticket agents, things like that, dispatchers, and what they do. Here's a mock-up of a train station and a ticket counter that you can go into and take a look around, and it's very well done, just like a lot of the other exhibits. Time for the train. This is a Louisville and Nashville car. My grandfather used to work on the L&N in an RPO car.
No kidding.
Yeah, he used to run Cincinnati to Chattanooga, I think. Or maybe Nashville, probably Cincinnati to Nashville. When my grandfather got out of the Army after World War II, he went to work for the post office, and his job was to work on the trains in the RPO cars. I remember several times when I was a kid being at a railroad museum with him where they had an RPO car, and he would talk about how it worked. There would be about a half dozen men working the car sorting the mail, but the most interesting thing was the mail hook where they would pick up the mail on the fly. Is that open? Oh yeah, hang out at the side and
You can actually. Wait, what? Oh, that's
catching the mail bags.
Yeah.
So, like, while you'd be moving, you'd be doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You
So
want
while
when
you'd
you
be
come up.
moving, so while you'd be moving, they'd be hanging up and you do that. And
Right.
then you put it down and they'd be on the hook and you grab them.
Yes, that's exactly
I wonder
right.
how many mail bags they've accidentally dropped. Behind.
At the Illinois Railway Museum, they have one of these, and that they actually use, and they demonstrate it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I've seen it done. I mean, you can pretty much imagine how it works, but it's still pretty neat to be able to actually see it.
See it in operation. Yeah.
And then I wonder how many mail bags they've dropped throughout the time.
Then, after they sorted all the mail for the various towns, they would drop it into the sacks and kick it off at the station as they went by, without the train ever stopping. Next to the RPO car was this business car used by VIPs and dignitaries of the railroad when they were traveling along the system. Galley, yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh, cool. Here's a bedroom car.
Yeah.
There's the bed that would fold down.
So this would have been the crew quarters berth, I would imagine. Yep. This would be the berth for the crew quarters.
This is a sink?
Yes.
Oh. Oh, it's a... So you put the dishes in there and then you close it. So you can still use stuff. Even if you have dirty dishes. Right?
Yeah, maybe.
Is this a passenger car or a diner car? I'm getting a diner car.
No, it's a passenger car. It's like a
It's an office car.
Yes, office car. Yes, that's what I was looking for. I was thinking business car. So you would have had a small amount of people that rode in here.
6.
Yeah, 6, and then you would have had probably two attendants, and so that was the attendants' quarters.
Oh.
So then you probably have 2 or 3 bedrooms.
Here? Oh, cigarettes.
Cigars.
Same thing. Spacious.
Yeah, this one's set up as this one's got a double bed.
Oh, this is a celebrity's car. Celebrity's room.
Okay, this one's made up into bunks. Yeah, it would have been cool to, be running, a couple days, 1,000 miles, riding a car like this, see the countryside. Speedometer, air brakes, air brake gauges. Guess that would have been a radio connection. You talk to the conductor.
Oh, probably.
Yeah, because the conductor would not have necessarily ridden here all the time. Well, looks like the train doesn't run. Now, we almost missed this HO model railroad. It was upstairs of the Technology Museum, and it's a diorama of the yards around Steamtown for the old Lackawanna shops from what it used to look like, I guess, back in its heyday. And it's very well done and very detailed, and it was really fun to check out what used to be there and how things are different from years ago to what it is today. So we're going to finish out in the yard. So there's a whole mess of equipment outside the roundhouse, and some of it you can explore, some of it's available for display, some of it is stuff that they have buried that they really kind of don't want you to see and have it on the back track with no trespassing signs. But there's some of it that you can walk through and take a look, and we wandered around as much as we felt like they would let us, and we'll show you what we found, and had some great discussions about some of this equipment and where it came from and how it used to operate. So and here we go. Meanwhile, we've got a freight train with Lackawanna Alcos switching here just outside Steamtown. So not something we see every day is Alco Power doing real work. Oh, here he comes. This one did run here.
So they're not going to run it again then?
No, they have no plans to run it again. But this one did run here. I've never been here, so I've never seen it run, but I've seen videos of this engine running.
I mean, none of the pieces are taking off.
Yeah, so it's pretty complete. And it really hasn't been that long since it ran.
Wait, the whistle's in shell.
It kind of protects the noise from the cab from the engineer. So, because whistles are loud and shrill, and it helps to block the noise so it's not as loud in the cab. This Alesco, they were common on the Canadian engines. The Hudson, the 2816's got this, doesn't it?
Yeah, most Canadian engines have this.
Oh, check this out. I don't think I've ever seen the lubricator mounted.
That's an F2. That's the final mechanical lubricator that they came up with for the cross-compounded compressors. Big boy's got F1s on it.
Yeah, this would have been a good engine to see out on the main line. Apparently it was quite popular. This, and then they have a Pacific. And the two of them, the Pacific ran most, but this one ran a fair amount too, I think.
Yeah, it's a good looking engine.
Yeah, not bad. So, I mean, realistically, I think the only thing really wrong with it is it just needs a 1472 and general maintenance, but nothing critical. But they elected that instead of keeping the two Canadian engines running. They were going to work on a Boston and Maine Pacific. But it's taken a very, very, very long time. So with that, then they have no mainline steam. So here's the Canadian Pacific 2317, a very nice looking 462 Pacific that was one of the favorites of Steamtown's excursion fleet. It last ran in 2010. Now it needs a 1,472 service day inspection on its boiler in order to run again. But the thing that we found most interesting about this locomotive was its unusual trailing truck.
Well, no, because see, it's like part of the frame, so that the frame doesn't rotate. It's the box slides back and forth, and the frame stays stationary.
That's not cool.
Yeah, because
Really cool.
it slides right there. You can see the wear surface, the sliding surface.
Oh, and you can see it's at an angle,
Right.
because it's going to be rotating.
All right, so this locomotive is kind of special and unique, well known, famous in certain circles. I'm not totally in it, but I have heard a lot of people talk about this engine because it is a unique style tank engine used in commuter service, as that sign indicates. Clearly in need of a good restoration. It's been sitting out here for a long time, and it's one of those things that the rail fans have taken a lot of exception to, wanting to see more done with this locomotive. Looks to be reasonably complete, so it can be done. A lot of needle scaling, some paint. Yeah, see, it's got a cow catcher on the back for running opposite directions. There's, windows there for the engineer to be able to see both directions. A Hancock Inspirator.
Oh, cool, Canadian National. I haven't seen a Canadian National.
Okay, but check it out. It's kind of like a tank engine. It doesn't have the tenders built in. It's got its own truck.
It almost reminds me of a Climax. Or like a Climax or a Shea with the
So would you?
attached to the cab?
But you wouldn't consider this a Hudson.
No.
That you wouldn't consider that a trailing truck,
Yeah.
a normal trailing truck, because it's a 464.
Yeah.
But it's not really a Hudson. No, they don't refer to it as a Hudson. You're right. I think it's a 464T or something. That sign identified it. This is one of those engines that a lot of people really want to see more done with. Now, this locomotive is equipped with an Alesco feedwater heater, and since we've seen several locomotives here with Alesco feedwater heaters, let's take a closer look on how they work. This steam-driven reciprocating pump takes water out of the tender and sends it up to a heat exchanger on top of the smoke box. In the heat exchanger, the water goes through a series of tubes, which are surrounded by steam that is exhausted from the cylinders. The hot water is then forced into the boiler through the boiler check, while the steam condenses and then returns to the tender. This is referred to as a closed system versus Worthington's open system, which I discuss at length in my tour of Grand Canyon Railway's 4960.
And then you get that big line going up to it is the exhaust steam from the cylinders.
Okay, to heat your water.
Yeah. The good thing about these is that you can get a lot hotter feed water than you can with an open system.
Then with the Worthington?
Than with the Worthington. The bad thing about these is that they're maintenance intensive, and that you'll scale up if you've got bad feed water. You can scale up the heater, and you have to clean those out. The engine that they've got at New Hope is also from that railroad.
Oh, is it?
So,
Take a look in the cab here.
How does it look like in there?
It's there. Look at that. Trees growing inside the tender,
Oh, that's eerie. Oh, holding.
supporting the ecosystem. These are steam generator units, Carson. So when they stopped running steam engines, but the cars were heated or, with steam heat.
This would be in the power car.
Yeah, or in the back of the diesel engine in order to provide steam for the passenger cars until they came up, Amtrak took over and they came up with head-end power in the F40s. Spent many hours running those and working on those. They're a pain in the butt.
Engine plus an entire steam engine, which is more dangerous.
Well, they're designed to be mostly automatic when everything is working well, and mostly automated.
But most of the time, stuff wasn't working well.
Oh yeah, but all it takes is a little bit of scale buildup inside there, or something, and then your firing rate's not quite right, and then all these automatic sensors are supposed to make it run automatically. They start getting goofed up, and then next thing you know, the whole thing is haywire, and it's overfiring, putting too much fuel in it. It's shooting out stacked exhaust temperatures and shutting down, and all kinds of crazy stuff.
How's the vestibules?
For all of your wrapping needs, Mr. Shrink Wrap. Superior protection, look at that. And Rotary snowplow. Steam powered, it's got a tender. I think the only steam powered rotary that that operates is at the Cumberson Toltec, and they went in it last in 2020. They have 2 rotaries at Cumberson Toltec. They ran the last one in 2020. They hadn't run it in a long time, and they got it running for 2020 for a special event. Now, this one might actually be one of my favorite engines in the collection, I think.
That's cool.
Because it's got good proportions to be a good excursion engine.
Oh, there's like a little, is it a walk-through tender?
Yes. Yeah, so they did that in cold weather, you know, to be so when you got snow and stuff like that, to be able to have it kind of enclosed to make it easier to get access to the tender and not have and keep the. No, you don't walk through the. No, you don't walk through the tender. That just gives you an opportunity to walk into the tender just to the coal pile to be able to get your coal easier. And see, it's got an what's called an all-weather cab, and it helps to keep the cab sealed, so that in nasty, snowy, blizzardy weather, you're not exposed as much to the elements.
Oh, ouch.
The daylight is actually like that.
This is one of my favorite ones here.
I was saying the same thing. This would be a good engine for, you know, an excursion service, a good medium-sized, you know, relatively high speed, a 482 mountain. There's not any 48 mountains running right now, since the 1522 hasn't run in 20 years.
The unfortunate thing is that they ended up it's got a cracked saddle. They said that this thing had a regular run, I think it was down to Bellows Falls, or it was somewhere, it ran from Canada down to somewhere in Vermont, and they had a Boilermaker especially assigned to this. Every time he came off of that train, he would strip the jacket off of the fireman's side, take a bobbing hammer, and pack all of the braids that they used to try and hold the saddle together. He'd have to bob all of that to keep it from leaking, and they'd send it back to Canada, and it'd come back, and so like every 2 days they were trying to do it. I don't know if they hit something or what, but yeah, that's why this thing will most likely never ever run.
This?
Yes. Unfortunately, it is such a cool looking locomotive.
The round tender and everything too.
Yeah, that's called a Vanderbilt tender.
These are box spoke type A.
Box spoke type A?
Yeah, this was before they kind of standardized on what's on that Reading engine.
Mm-hmm. Let's pause this video right here. I'm seeing that locomotive drive wheels is a reoccurring topic, and probably worthy of more attention. After all, this is the second time in 3 days that the topic has come up. So instead of including the intricacies of driving wheels here in this episode, I'm going to create another spin-off video, which will be available at the conclusion of this series.
It's a 242 tank engine? Really?
And again, look at how much open space there is in the frame.
Yeah, like the other one that we saw 2 days ago.
Yeah. Well, the one thing, locomotives are usually designed for a specific purpose. Yeah, not industrial plants, small yards, not going very far. They've got access to top off the coal and water pretty easy. They don't move a whole lot of cars.
Maybe what, 5 or 6?
Yeah, depending on the grade of the track, how heavy the cars are.
Look how rough these passenger cars are.
That's why they hide them out here on the back track. Now there's so much more equipment out in the yard, and we didn't even realize what was there until we climbed up on the walkway that goes to the shopping mall and took a look.
Is that like a steam generator?
Yeah, that's what we saw earlier. And then what I consider the most significant part of their collection, if not the most significant steam-related artifact in North America, right there.
New York Central tender.
Yeah, that is the only surviving piece of a Hudson left.
The Hudson.
They took one of the Hudson tenders and they turned it into a fuel oil car, and that made it in here.
Well, we spent 7 hours at Steamtown. We were there pretty much from open until close. We didn't leave until 5 o'clock. And we honestly could have spent more time. There was just so much to see and explore. But by the time we got done, we were starving. You know, that was a long time, and we had a good breakfast at the hotel beforehand and some snacks we carried with us. But man, we were starving, and we asked one of the rangers, where's a good place locally in order to go get some lunch or something to eat. And they said, you got to check out the old Lackawanna train station, which is right across the tracks. It's now turned into a hotel, and they have 2 restaurants. They have a main dining room in the main concourse, which is probably way too fancy for us, and I'm not sure that it was open when we were there. But in the back, on the old station platform, they have that enclosed, and they have that turned into more of a brew pub. And we had a really nice meal there that was absolutely delicious. And of course, just checking out the old station was fantastic, and they've got a lot of memorabilia and photos and things, so definitely worth checking out. Well, what's my take on Steamtown? First, I want to say that I was expecting and looking forward to learning more about the development of Steamtown, Nelson Blount, and the history of how the collection came to be. I did not find that anywhere in the museum. Perhaps the closed visitor center has something, but somehow I doubt it. Here's what I understand to be the National Park Service's official response to this question. Steamtown National Historic Site was created in 1986 to preserve the history of steam railroading in America, concentrating on the era 1850 through 1950. This is the mission of the park. The park was not created to preserve the history of Steamtown, USA. Our site does touch on the history of railroad preservation, specifically in our History Museum. The work of F. Nelson Blount, creator of the former Steamtown, USA, and other pioneers in the steam preservation movement, is a part, albeit a small part, of the story Steamtown National Historic Site has been charged with preserving. Due to Steamtown's association with the National Park Service, I would expect and hope that it would be the crown jewel among American railway museums and a beacon to those interested in America's industrial heritage in the early 20th century. Unfortunately, I did not find it to be the case, and its disappointing attendance numbers seem to confirm this position. I feel that Steamtown should be the home away from home and supporting institution to various well-intended nonprofit groups in their attempt to revive heritage artifacts of industrial might. Wouldn't it be cool if an organization, lacking in a reliable place or adequate machinery to work on their project, could bring it, or at least part of it, to Steamtown and use their shop space? This could benefit both operations as a way to demonstrate, train, and keep alive the skills needed to repair and maintain these unique machines. Visiting locomotives, once operational, could then be tested and used on the main line to pull excursions, helping to generate revenue through ticket sales that could partially offset their rebuild or rental fees. That's my vision, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. Hopefully one day it will get there. But for now, I hope they can just continue to work on protecting the equipment buried out in the yard from further deterioration and get it on proper display where it belongs. This brings us to the part of the episode where we count how many steam locomotives we've seen today. And wow, today it's been a bunch. So here we go, in no particular order. The first is this 1923 Baldwin 060 built for the Spang Shawfetten Company. Now, as I said, this section locomotive was really nicely done by J. David Conrad. It even has a nice humorous touch that most people probably won't notice. The second is this 1914 464T, number 47, built by the Montreal Locomotive Works for the Canadian National. Across the way is Rahway Valley Railroad, number 15, a 280 built by Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1916. Next we have the Brooks Scanlon Corporation, number 1, a Baldwin Locomotive Works product of 262, built in 1914. There's quite a few tank engines at Steamtown. This one is the Berlin Mills Railway number 7, a 242T, built by the Vulcan Iron Works in 1911. This 060 tank engine was built by the American Locomotive Company in 1927. It's lettered for the E.J. Lavino and Company Railroad. Number 43 is a New Haven Trap Rock Company engine, an 040 tank engine built by the Vulcan Iron Works in 1919. Here we have Nickel Plate 759, a 284 Berkshire, built by the Lima Locomotive Works in 1944. And this, of course, is the largest locomotive in the collection, Union Pacific 4012, a 4884 Big Boy, built by the American Locomotive Company in 1941. Here we have the newest locomotive in the collection, built in 1947 by the Reading Shops, Reading Company 2124, a big 484 Northern. And that brings us to my favorite locomotive in the collection, the Grand Trunk 6039, a 482 Mountain. Mountains are kind of rare in preservation world. This one's built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1925. The 3254 is a 282 Mikado, built in 1917 by the Canadian Locomotive Company for the Canadian National Railway. Illinois Central 280 number 790 is the oldest locomotive in the collection, built by the American Locomotive Company in 1903. Now these next few locomotives were way out in the yard and hard to identify because we couldn't get up close to them. But this one I believe is Maine Central number 519, a 280 built by the American Locomotive Company in 1913. Now this is one I would have liked to have gotten a much closer look at. The 2929, a Canadian Pacific Railway 444, a very rare wheel arrangement, built by the Canadian Locomotive Company in 1936, the only streamlined steam locomotive in the Steamtown collection, also known as a Jubilee. Now this looks like a cute little steam engine, the Norwood and St. Lawrence Railroad 260 number 210, built by the American Locomotive Company in 1923. Now this I believe is the Nickel Plate Railroad number 44, a 460 from the Brooks Locomotive Company in 1905, and according to the notes, it's the oldest surviving nickel plate railroad locomotive in existence. Now, we almost missed this guy, Meadow River Lumber Company Class B Shay, number 1, a Lima Locomotive Works product of 1910. Now, this is the number 26, a Baldwin Locomotive Works 060, built in 1929 to be their shop switcher, and the only operational locomotive at Steamtown currently. 2317, a 462 Pacific built by the Montreal Locomotive Works in 1923. Former Canadian Pacific Railway, but used by Steamtown as one of their famed excursion engines in years past. This is the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western number 565, a 260 built by the American Locomotive Company in 1908. It's the only Delaware, Lackawanna and Western locomotive in the collection. Hiding out behind the shop, which we almost didn't get to see, is the Lowville and Beaver River Railroad 1923, a 280 American Locomotive Company product built in 1920. And how can we forget the 3713 Constitution, the Boston and Maine 462 Pacific built by Lima in 1934. Now, according to the Steamtown website, there are 2 more locomotives that we didn't get a chance to see, and sources indicate that they're hiding in the back shop for cosmetic restoration. One of them is the Bullard Company number 2, an 040 tank engine built by H.K. Porter in 1937. It's the smallest locomotive in the collection. There's also a fireless locomotive, the Public Service Electric and Gas Company 6816, an 060 fireless, built by H.K. Porter in 1923. So today we saw a total of 23 steam locomotives, which brings our trip total, including our previous 2 days, to 32 steam locomotives, and there's a lot more coming, so stay tuned. Tonight we're headed south across the state line to visit another museum that has the best collection of 19th century steam locomotives in the United States. This is another one on my long-time bucket list, and I'm really excited. Hope you'll join us.